All right, all you pirates out there, we're back. Part two, Bill Daly. We're talking Jonah Hex. And fortunately for all of you, he went out and dusted off a classic, a literary classic, if you will, a comic featuring his old friend, Jerry Lewis. Correct? Is that what you've got?
Yes. Well, I have more than just one. I have a few here. Um,
Yeah.
so,
See it.
so I didn't know that they were. I stopped reading comic books about the time that I thought DC Comics stopped doing the Adventures of Jerry Lewis. So when we had our little break there, I looked it up, and they kept doing this Jerry Lewis comic until the 1971-72 season, whatever that
Right.
was. I stopped reading about 1968. I actually have the last one, number 108, and
Nice.
it went for 124 issues. So this one you'll see is number 108,
Look at that. That
October
that's a
1968,
tough
I'm
comic,
guessing.
man. That's definitely a
And it looks
yeah.
like all the other, it doesn't look like all the other DC comics because it has all these ads and stuff in it.
Yeah.
But and they used to have a column where
Does it reference his
you could write to Jerry,
oh, that's good. That's actually a good, that's a nice touch.
you know. Um, and there used to be these
Nice.
really funny things in here, but I'm amused by the most infantile sort of comedy. I mean,
Yeah, we know that
Rowan
about you.
Atkinson is, and of course I've always been a fan of Jerry Lewis too. This is number 102. Um, I don't remember what year that is. The
All right.
last one I got was number 108, so this was a little bit before that. So I
When I
still
come
have
by,
the
when I come by to pick up my autographed soccer ball, I'm going to expect you to have
yes,
those out and ready for me to go through.
and that ball is right. It's like
Just put all my stuff in a box
I
to the
can
left of
touch.
your
I'm
desk,
touching the
buddy.
box. I'm touching the
There
box.
you go. Yeah, I'm going to come get that next week.
Yes. But then I found with this, I found an old Superman. You can see these are
Hmm.
worn out.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I had these. I had put stuff into boxes into my parents' attic, and my parents wanted to do something in the attic, so they pulled, they got somebody, friend of my sister or somebody, to go up there and go through this stuff. Nobody asked me, but they retrieved a bunch of stuff, and then on my next trip home, I had to get it and then get all this stuff. And then they threw a lot of stuff out. Some of the stuff they threw out I missed. I wish they hadn't, but this is 40 years ago, so I don't remember what they all were. But for some reason, they held on to these Jerry Lewis things. Now, this one I went out and got. I went on eBay or somewhere and I found this one. This is from the month I was born. This is, you see, July,
Hmm.
August. That's 1953.
Is that Lewis in the Target area having the
Yeah.
knives thrown at that? Yeah, that makes sense, right?
And then
Yeah.
there's Dean cheering him on
Yeah.
there.
But you know what that's missing? Well, it's for kids, right? So I guess he shouldn't be holding a martini glass, but whatever.
I know exactly. That's the hand you can't see. It's the don't,
Exactly.
you
Well,
know.
who's yelling
Um,
cut on that cover? Who is that? Is that one of
but
their
look,
sidekicks?
Tom McCann shoes for $7 and 70
$7.
cents.
Wow.
This is
Oh,
71 years ago almost, this thing.
yeah. And
So
those
I
are
keep it.
probably shoes made in America for $7.
Yes. Yeah. Boston was
All
a
right.
big.
So let's get back to the subject at hand before our audience
Okay.
resents us.
Oh yeah. So anyway, so I looked it up because I knew in the back of my head that there was a Warner Brothers affiliation to DC Comics,
Yeah.
and it was the Kinney Corporation, which was Steve Ross before he changed the name to Warner Communications. They acquired DC Comics in 1967. So
Brilliant
about the
move.
time that I was giving these up, they acquired it along with, and then in 1972, I want to say maybe it was 71, is when he changed the name to Warner Communications because he realized that that was the
Hmm.
thing upon which to anchor the company and not his parking stuff that he had, the parking lots.
Makes sense. And I would love to do more on Steve Ross because I've got some great Ross insight and some great stories from the New York Cosmos on him. But so now we can thank Steve Ross for the acquisition of DC Comics, which has led not only to all these wonderful properties and movies, but the epic Jonah Hex. Now that Steve Ross is still with us, ladies and gentlemen, the ghost of Steve Ross still haunts the
Yes,
studio, and his work is still something that we benefit from today. And Jonah Hex is a perfect example. So where we left off, Josh Brolin was in. The Crank directors were out. We don't know if that's a related issue.
exactly. I don't know if that was related or not, but they were out. And then
Yeah.
so what precipitated this conversation was the article in Comic Book Magazine about Josh Brolin. I think they'd gone back. They must have initiated the conversation because Jimmy Hayward, the director of this thing, is ill. And so Josh sort of backed off a little bit on his criticism. He said he would never stop shitting on Jonah Hex, but he felt badly about Jimmy Hayward. I don't know how Jimmy Hayward got on the project. Honest to God, I don't know. He only had, if you look up IMDb, he's got 3 credits. And I knew at the time that he had only ever done 2 animated things, and that he wasn't even totally responsible for those. At least that's what I heard.
Okay. So
So they brought him.
what I heard was that he was a Pixar guy.
Well, was Pixar? I guess Pixar. It could be. It's possible. I don't know. I don't know anything about him.
But this is what's interesting about this movie because I remember at the time the Post at Warner Brothers, Video Ops, that group, 38 North, they were under the impression that this guy had done nothing and was now directing this movie. And I guess from dailies, they could see the train wreck coming down the tracks really early. That department, that
Yes.
department's a good indicator of where a movie is headed. And
And
they
I
were,
saw
and my,
this stuff before they did.
yeah, so you definitely were in the know. But my wife, I remember saying, going, I don't know if this is a friend of Josh Brolin or how this came about, but this movie's in trouble. And I think she thought it was a good. I mean, the first thing that strikes me about this movie is everybody's in this. This movie's got a great cast.
Yes.
Better
Yes.
now than it was at the time, but it was still good at the time, including, John Malkovich, who, by the way, there's a funny story. Maybe you've heard it. Bill Hader of Saturday Night Live claims, and I know he's not lying, but I can't substantiate it. He claims he was a production assistant on Collateral Damage. Well, I worked on Collateral Damage for the production company Bel Air, and I can't recall him. And he is too talented to have been a production assistant on Collateral Damage, though that's his story. And I'm sure it's
Wait. Bill
true.
Hader was the PA
Yeah, Bill Hader must have been with the Mexico unit on that or something, but
for
he's
Collateral
not
Damage
lying.
was 2001. I mean, it was around 10,
Yeah,
9/11.
it was
It was
2000. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was.
well, we because we
I
withheld
remember
the
we
distribution
stalled
of
the
that
release.
because of the whole idea. It was the World Trade Center, and it was LA's World Trade Center. And so that was the thing, and it was deemed to be too insensitive. So we held back on releasing that so that we wouldn't offend the whole world with
Right.
it,
Well,
you know.
I mean, I'm the one that was arguing just to release the movie, right? Just because my argument was the American audience wants payback, even if it's on the screen. They want some sort of proactive action taken. Anyway, that's a story for another day. Bill Hader is not lying when he tells that story, and he's super talented, and I love him. He's the funniest thing out of Saturday Night Live in 2 decades, in my opinion. But it is funny. I'm like, I can't remember him on the movie. Um, and maybe that's a good thing. But where I was going with that is, have you ever seen him do his John Malkovich impression to John Malkovich? And Malkovich
No, but
goes,
I'd
I don't
love.
sound like that. And he's like, you sound exactly like that. It's really well done. Super
I
funny
haven't.
stuff.
I will look for that. Yeah.
But Malkovich is the villain in this. That's where that was. I'm
Yeah.
sorry to derail us. Continue.
Excuse me. I'm sorry to
We
give
don't
you an
know.
edit right there.
So, no, well, no editing's going to save this
Well,
show,
John
buddy. But
Malkovich, John Malkovich, I always squirmed in my seat whenever I would see John Malkovich in any movie,
Mhm.
and it just had that effect on me where he I would be unsettled, you know. And but I got to tell you that turned around on Jonah Hex because he was such a cool guy. He was so gracious and just so chill and so
Yeah.
cool and funny. And we're talking about Jerry Lewis, not in that way, but John Malkovich has this way about it. I mean, in the same way that Alan Rickman did, where I mean, the
Hmm.
guy was just funny. He had great takes on things and all
And they
that.
both
So
played the same roles
so
in
yeah,
Dangerous
I mean,
Liaisons. Yeah.
yeah. Oh yes they did.
Yeah.
So it
They have
was
those qualities.
so Jonah
Had.
Hex is what turned me around on John Malkovich. I can watch him now. It was just yeah, and I don't know what it,
Do you think? See, I have a theory. I think he knows he does that. I think he knows he's kind of like the modern day equivalent of yeah, I'm thinking of that actor from the
well,
70s that loved to kind of
perhaps it's a veneer for him
yeah.
that he needs to do this to sort of protect himself and keep people
Mhm.
at bay. I spent this whole weekend with a director from England, and we talked a lot about Tommy Lee Jones, and
Oh,
and Tommy Lee Jones is such a jerk. I mean, in
yeah.
so
Oh,
many ways, and
terrible.
I think that's perhaps his veneer, something that he does to keep people unsettled. Because the question did come to me did how did Andy Davis deal with him? Because Andy Davis did so many movies with him, with Warner Brothers and without Warner Brothers. He did a bunch of movies with Tommy Lee Jones, and you wonder how he handled him. I was never there on the set for Under Siege because they shot that in Alabama, so I never went to that set, and that's where all the Tommy stuff was done. I don't remember the stage stuff,
So,
where the stage stuff would have done. Their offices were at Warner Hollywood. So
do you,
I don't know if they did stuff there, but I don't know.
before we start to get the geography of the setup down, he was on Space Cowboys with Eastwood's group when I was there, and he would not come in and do ADR. There was something where Eastwood was so furious with him that they used a different voice for him for the Space
Yes.
Cowboys trailer. Do you remember? You know about that?
Well,
And I
I
remember
don't know
Joel
about that.
Cox telling me that, going,
I
"This
don't know.
motherfucker."
I don't know that story specifically, but there are a lot of actors in town who won't do the radar. And there are voiceover people who specialize in certain voices and will do it. So, and I can tell you that if you're watching a Martin Lawrence movie, and if it's not a medium shot or a close up, it's not even him. You don't even in the far shots, you don't it's not even him. It's a body double. And he does not do voiceover. Now we got Eddie Murphy had the same reputation, but Eddie came in and did um, a good part of his ADR. I like almost all of his ADR on Showtime and the one that he did that takes place in outer space that we
Pluto
did,
Nash.
Pluto Nash. Yeah. So we had heard that he didn't do it,
I
but he
remember.
did. He did, but he didn't do all of it. And the thing is, on some level, yeah, it's not even on some level. I'm not going to apologize for these people.
Hello, my name is Simon Williamson. Help us find a cure for NMOSD, neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder, and with it, cancer. Please go to the Guthrie Jackson Foundation and donate if you can.
They overproduce the sound. I mean,
Hmm.
the ADR editors would want you to replace every line of dialogue there is, but the fact is that the mixers in the final dub, they can filter out the bad stuff. They can't filter out bad performances, but they can filter out the little glitches and stuff that might degrade the audio a little bit. And I think that the ADR editors and sound supervisors in general overproduce the post-production. Absolutely. And
Well,
we
I
could
think that's
save a lot of
true.
money if we didn't have that horse shit.
That's true to a degree, and you're right. But I think in the case of what we're talking about with Tommy Lee Jones, I think there's a lot more to that personality that makes him challenging than not showing up for his ADR.
Well, I don't think personally, I don't think Clint would ask for ADR of stuff that wasn't actually required. And
Exactly.
Alan Murray, who was his sound supervisor, sadly, the late Alan Murray, he wasn't one of those guys that absolutely overproduced everything. And I always used to tell all those guys, including Alan, I would say, you know, be smart about your choices. Don't overdo everything, you know. But to defend them, they need to show up on mixing stage with all kinds of different choices for directors if they go, I don't like the sound of that. Do you have something else? Especially like in sound effects and stuff like that. I think less of a problem now because all these sound guys have websites and they can just dial in from the mixing stage and get it.
Yeah. I have no idea what led us from Jonah Hex. Oh, John Malkovich.
Yeah, John Malkovich and Tommy Lee Jones. It's, you know, so
The less we talk about Tommy Lee Jones, probably the better. Actually, I can give
yeah,
you all kinds of
I don't,
stories from
we
people.
did, it seemed like we had him in every movie. There were a couple years where he was in absolutely everything. And you get sick of spending your afternoons with these people when you're doing dailies. When I'm sitting in dailies, you know, like when we did Analyze This and Analyze That and The Departed, it was like I was so tired of gangsters, and I felt like I was spending my afternoon with these scumbags. I recognized they were actors playing a part, you know, but that was one of the issues I
Not
had
all
with
of them,
this.
not all of them,
Right.
but I know.
Oh, I know. And you know what?
Let's
In the
not go
first
down that
movie,
rabbit hole.
yeah, let's not. But that's the way
Okay,
I felt about The Sopranos too, was I was inviting these people into my home every Sunday night. And I just got tired of it.
yeah, and you were. So I'm going to give you one fun Tommy Lee Jones recommendation because we don't want to completely throw a human being under the bus, although this guy was difficult, and from my understanding, still is. The Park Is Mine with Tommy Lee Jones and Yaphet Kotto. See that and have a good time. Thank me later. Now back to Jonah Hex. Malkovich earned your respect because he was easy to work with, and that's always the trick.
He always had my respect. The guy won an Oscar.
Yeah,
He
he did.
he gained my admiration, is what he did. He gained my admiration. I will give respect to anybody who deserves it. And if you respect me, I'll respect you back. But he gained my admiration on of all things, Jonah Hex, the movie that we
Mhm.
all want to shit on.
No, but you know that's the sign, right? We were talking. Richard Ashton from Vikings and I were having a conversation about um, Christopher Lee and how he said something to the effect of every actor is going to have a mo. It's the job of every actor on occasion to be in a bad movie, but the trick is to not be bad in them. And that's there's your
I
a little
agree.
wisdom from Christopher Lee for this afternoon.
I agree. I agree.
Hold on.
Because I
All
need
right,
this.
welcome back. Quite a little quick detour. All right, so we're talking Jonah Hex. We have John Malkovich, who surprised Bill. Ravi's the executive on it. Akiva's company's producing it and at some point goes into salvation mode. So do you. Now, what are you doing when you're working until midnight on a movie? Like what exactly? Explain to the audience.
It's mostly somebody had to be there to approve things if they weren't sure. Like if they needed the studio to approve anything, I'd be the guy. I'd be there to do it. And I was a senior vice president. I had approval authority up to $1 million, believe it or not.
Mhm.
So all of these aspiring filmmakers out there who had their little independent projects that I just need $10,000 to do it. I could have approved your whole project.
Bro,
And
why
then
didn't we do Night
10
Fever?
more,
We could have
you
done
know.
Night Fever for $1 million, no problem, and the
Yeah,
studio would be making a
but the studio
ton of money on.
they didn't buy that. They didn't buy into that. Plus, this was a DC project, so Legendary was in on it too. So when I would go to the mixing stage, it just wasn't Akiva. It wasn't
Yeah.
Akiva, and we already mentioned Andrew Lazar. It wasn't just them, but you also had John Jasny from and Thomas Tull and Bill Fay from Legendary, and then once in a while we'd see Greg Silverman in there. I got the feeling that I don't know if Greg was trying to distance himself from this project or what, but I got the feeling that he wasn't as committed to it as perhaps something else he might have been doing simultaneously,
So
which, you know, happens.
does happen. How soon into production or pre-production did you realize this thing's coming off the rails?
Well, it wasn't until we started getting dailies, you know, and the
So
dailies weren't the daily. It wasn't so much that the dailies were bad as much as, well, some of the performances were not that great, but when they started putting together cut footage, when we saw the director's cut, I mean, that
oh
was
no.
just, it
Yeah.
was cringeworthy. And Yeah, I mean that's all you can say about it. It's cringeworthy. And I found out talking to Ravi that Jimmy Hayward, the director, wasn't even sober through most of the production stuff. That he was either
That's a good
drunk or
sign.
high or something. And Ravi was complaining about it all the time, complaining about it. I didn't know this. I didn't know he was complaining about it. Because I heard I was with Mark Solomon and Jeff Robinoff pulled Mark aside, and I was by Mark's side. I would, we he was my boss. We worked together. Um, and he was, oh, actually, it wasn't Mark Solomon. It was Steve Papazian. So he was Mark's boss. So I stayed behind in a meeting, probably to ask a question or something. And Jeff said, it was in Jeff's conference room, and nobody else was there, just Steve and Jeff and I. Robbie's one of us, isn't he? And Steve's like, yeah, well, yeah, he's one of the guys. And Jeff's like, well, how come I didn't hear about any of this stuff? About Jimmy being not sober. And
Mm.
alarm bells were ringing off in my head because I knew that Robbie was complaining. I was hearing about it. So when I got back to my office, I called Robbie and I told him about that conversation. And Robbie was pissed, absolutely pissed because he had been calling he'd been calling Greg Silverman every day. And Greg was Jeff's right-hand guy.
Why
What was
isn't this
Silverman
director
doing?
replaced? Why isn't this director replaced?
Well, I mean, I would have replaced him the first week if I knew that he was the first day. If he showed up drunk, the
Yeah,
first
you're gone.
day,
You're gone.
if it was me, but that wasn't me, and I didn't know. I didn't know it. I didn't know it while we were in production. I was starting to hear stories,
Hmm.
and when you talk to Robbie about it, there's a fine line. You want to find out what's going on, but you don't want to be a gossip about it. And to set the record straight, we all love to hear the gossip, but nobody wants to be perceived as a gossip, you know? So,
Well, what we're talking about is sort of a key ingredient to the overall investment.
well, it
So
is. It is.
this
And I
is,
think the reason that, well, according to the article in Comic Book Magazine or comicbook.com, so everybody should check it out, Josh
mm,
Brolin. Um, Apparently Jimmy Hayward is very ill. I think it was bone cancer was what was listed in the thing, and apparently it's affecting his facial bones and stuff.
and
So
that sucks.
so it's so Jimmy's having a really, really hard time. So Josh is I guess probably feeling bad about any personal attacks, but I'm not aware of them because I don't pay attention to it. These projects are over and I move along to the next one. I try not to dwell on them.
As we all should,
But you
honestly.
but you keep dragging me back into these
Well,
things,
hold up.
So
Stop acting like I'm the mafia. Questions come up, but
yeah, I know.
it's not like we step into a production bear trap with some of
Listen,
this. We just like to discuss it.
nobody's, but not, we're not doing brain surgery on infants either. Okay.
Right, right,
We're making
right.
movies, we're making entertainment
I
and
agree.
hopefully it entertains people. Now, Josh in the article apologized, was apologizing to cast members. Um, so, I guess he feels responsible for bringing some of them onto the project. I don't know if Josh was the guy responsible for um, John Malkovich per se, although he did mention that Malkovich had been wiped out with the Bernie Madoff thing, right? Do you remember that in the article?
Yeah, I didn't read the article,
That,
but I know that from the
oh, okay.
case,
That
from the
was,
Madoff
oh, I see.
file.
I didn't know. This was the first time I heard that. I had no idea that, and John took this job. I guess it wasn't his first choice of kind of characters to play or movies to do, but he took this job because he was doing less than his usual rate to do it because they were trying to prove that they could do a DC project for less than $1 billion. I'm exaggerating, but
Well,
you
they
get the
they
point.
can, even if they fail to prove it here, they certainly can.
You get the
And
point. You get the
yeah,
point. They
and
were trying to prove that they could take a DC property and do it for a good price. And Josh, I guess, is the one who convinced Megan Fox to come on and do the thing. And I guess
mm,
Megan, I don't understand the criticism. I guess Megan must have gotten criticized for her performance or something in it, which I think is completely unwarranted because she commands the screen in every scene that she's in. And she did all the things that she was required to do. And that was a tough shoot for her because, there's a scene in there. We spent, I think, 2 days shooting it. There's a scene in there where, she plays a prostitute and she's literally beaten up by um,
Is it Fassbender that
Rio.
does that?
No, no, no. It's Rio Hackford, Taylor Hackford's son, Rio. Sadly, he passed away a year or two ago. Um, he was, and he was a young man. It's sad. But there's a scene where because she's a prostitute and he's a John, I guess, or whatever, and he's beating her up. And I remember watching dailies for a couple of days. This, additional takes and stuff of this one scene. And Rio, not that I mean, not that Rio was actually beating her up, but it was a rough scene. And in addition to his acting and directing work, Rio also was like an on-set trainer, training people how to fight and stuff like that for the screen and all that. So it was a very arduous task for Megan to have to shoot those scenes, and she literally got beat up. I mean, not that she was beaten, but it had it demanded a lot of her physically to do that, and she was the greatest sport about it. Absolutely. And everybody was commenting, even in screening room two, what a great sport Megan Fox was. We need to bring her back. We need to put her in some other movie or something. I'm not aware that they ever did, but she was great. And then when they were doing the publicity, they went to Comic-Con to promote this. And so when they were doing all the publicity and stuff, she did everything. I mean, she went there and practically seduced all of those people that, the critics and all that stuff. She was playing up to them and everything she did well over and above what she was required to do for that part. So she doesn't deserve any criticism at all for this movie.
I've heard her say that this is the worst movie she's ever been in, and it's funny because this is a woman who was also in Transformers. So I'm not
But
sure.
Transformers was a huge box office hit too.
Look, some things in this universe we cannot explain, but moving
Well,
past this,
look at the audience, but the audience, I mean, she was very young at the time, and this was aimed at a teenage audience. I remember seeing it and thinking it was pretty good. It wasn't exactly to my taste, but I thought it was pretty good. They executed everything really, really well. I thought Megan, if she played her cards right, would have a really good future ahead of her. She's very alluring. I mean, she really is. So I believe her when she says this is the worst thing she ever did, because as far as box office performance, it probably is. And artistic value, the package as a whole probably is, but she was very good in it.
I keep
You know,
thinking in
she,
terms of missed opportunities, and I really think Jonah Hex and Transformers, since we're on the subject, just could have been better movies. I think like the subject matter and the approach could have been better. It's just a personal
well, I
preference I
think you're
have, I
right,
suppose.
but you greenlight these movies because you have a target price in mind. You do all the analysis to figure out exactly how much you can spend on this movie and make a profit, and anything above that, and you're losing money. So, given what the Ultimates reveal, you're stuck at a budget. You're stuck at a budget
So
number, and sometimes Warner Brothers can't do them for the budget number because, of course, when we start calling for equipment renters and costume rental places and locations and everything else, oh, it's Warner Brothers. Oh, they can afford, they can
yeah,
they can pay a lot of money for this, and that's what happens. We end up paying way more than we should, but those are the economics of we pay these people the high prices so that the lower budget people don't have to.
before you get into the ultimates, in regards to Hex, so pretty early on in the process, and I know Building 38 North thought this movie was a train wreck. There were they were openly discussing how this director got on the film, feeling like it was a friend of somebody and he was just put in there, and
Must have been.
that's that's kind of what their angle was. Like that's the only explanation they could
Well,
come up
look,
with. But everyone's
what,
worried about this movie at that stage of production, correct? Go. You were
yes.
going to say something. Go ahead.
Well, with the article that started this conversation from comicbook.com leads us to believe that Jeff Robinoff was the one who brought Jimmy Hayward on. And I don't know if that's exactly true. If it is, if it was a Jeff Robinoff thing and Jeff stood behind him, that would explain
Right.
why Greg Silverman wasn't reporting the bad news about Jimmy during production. And it would really lay at Jeff's feet the whole disaster that was this movie. Absolutely. And I got to tell you, Josh Brolin took a huge interest in this thing too. Like he was there for all the meetings and stuff like that. And he was there during post-production and he was there for the screenings and he would openly talk about the elements of the movie. Because you got a sense talking to Josh that he was a really good storyteller himself. And perhaps if Josh was a little bit older, maybe he would have been a great director for this movie. Maybe if somebody has the balls and the money to do a sequel, they should get Josh to produce and direct as well.
Yeah, I'm sure he's would love to have that lunch. But I think that's makes sense now that you say that if Robinoff, who was the Warshawski's agent, by the way, if
Well, not
he
at the time,
no,
but
not at the time, but he meaning he was an agent and he was a handler of talent. And
yeah,
he brings in this director and they go to town. That makes sense that he wasn't getting the report that, hey,
that's the
your
only
guy.
explanation in my mind. And Jimmy
Mine
Hayward,
too.
I heard, actually was begging for this job, absolutely begging for the job. But it's like, why didn't he perform better? Why didn't he show up sober if he was begging
Yeah.
for the job?
It's
There's so many things that don't make complete sense to me. And of course I wasn't giving it my full attention because I was busy and I wasn't required to. I
well,
had a
what
boss who was paying attention to it, and I had a production exec who was paying attention to it, as well. I only got brought in because I would have been a presence on the stage that would stop arguments between producers and between Legendary and the studio, and I was a guy who could approve things as well. So a lot of times I was sent to do these tasks because they would behave better around me because they all thought I
so
was attached to Bob Daly.
that makes sense. That makes sense. Unfortunately, they don't they don't do better because they're professionals. They do better because they fear your name, and I have an issue with that. But so circling back, that makes perfect sense to me that this director, because obviously Robinoff signs off on it, and this guy did not have a track record going into it that would make you think, wow, great choice. In fact, we know that there were two directors on it that were really good.
Yeah, they certainly would have brought something completely different to it. I don't know what.
Right.
And I wondered when I saw them on
Cohesive
Crank.
storytelling for one,
Well, no,
probably.
but I remember when they were doing Crank 2 when we were watching them and they were actually handling camera as well. They weren't the DPs, but they were camera operators and they were doing their inline skating. I
Mm.
wondered how they would do that on a dirt Western street. I wondered that in my head how they were going to do that, but I was amazed at their process, absolutely amazed at the process, and I'm disappointed that they left for whatever reason they left, and I'm disappointed that I never ever then did get that chance to work with them.
I'd like to hear their side of it. I'd like to hear about their departure because it
Wouldn't
makes me
that be
think,
great? Call them.
yeah, yeah, I should. I should call them because they certainly had the skill set to at least deliver a fun movie, right? They're gone. A new guy with no real track record to speak of is in put in their place. The head of the studio who okays that decision is not given the complete picture about this guy's condition. And it makes me think that Robinoff probably said, okay, hey, look, here's a smaller movie with a great cast. We'll put the right people around you. Go. We're going to give you this one. And
And they were the right people, because Andrew
right,
Lazar
there's some good people
and
on it.
Akiva Goldsman and John Jasny and Bill Fay, they were the right people. They are A-list people. I mean, they really are. And you had a
And
really good star at the time who knew the score, in Josh
yeah,
Brolin. Um, and John Malkovich, they were able to get John Malkovich for a price, although under duress, you know. Um,
and you could have brought in Bill Hader to ADR John Malkovich if he refused to do it.
I don't
You know,
think John would have refused to do it. John was so
no, he
calm.
wouldn't have. It's a
And
joke. It's a
and
joke.
it was because he was doing ADR that I met him. So,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, for sure. For sure. Bill Hader's my solution to any technical ADR issue because he can pretty much do impressions of anybody. But you're right. There's a whole arsenal of people that'll jump in at a moment's notice to ADR a star who refuses to do it. It's sad, though, that this seemed like I'm not even a comic book guy. We've already covered that. I didn't see my first comic until 9, and I blame my surfboards for that. But I hear this idea and I think that would probably work as a movie in 2010. That sounds like something with the trends and with the right people. That sounds like boom. So this is
Well,
all very sad to talk about.
yeah. Well, I saw the comic book. I mean, not the original, but we were given comic books. And I don't
Mm,
remember if it was our story or not, but we got I mean, they look like DC Comics.
right.
And it was great because it gives you a reference. It's a storyboard. It gives you reference of what characters look like, what costumes look like, what the sets are going to look like. You have 2 minutes left. Do you want to stop this and pick it up on a
Yeah, let's
third
take a
try?
break. Let's take a break and do a third. Um, more Jonah Hex. What everyone's been asking for, folks. Jonah Hex coming up.
Hey guys.
We're the Tennessee werewolves.
Hey guys, help us here at MOSD. And along with your cancer.
Yeah, go to the Guthrie Jackson Foundation, donate. Every dollar counts. So whatever you give, they need your help.
Absolutely.
Bring
Let's
it
get
out.
Yeah. Let's go. We do it. We do it.